Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Here you can find lots of videos on Leaving Cert poetry and other aspects of the course as well. If you find it useful, please subscribe. Okay, today we're going to look at the poem The Cadillac in the Attic by Andrew Hutchins. Hutchins was born in Texas, USA in 1951. He has won many prizes for his poetry. His poetry is famous for its humour, and many of his poems are told in a narrative, story-like style. He writes about real events in his life, and he now teaches at Ohio State University. Title: A Cadillac in the Attic. From the photo you can see a Cadillac was an old-style luxury American car, and the attic is the storage room under the roof of your house. So just before we read the poem, I'd like you to reflect. Think of something that you have created before, something you've cooked, a piece of art, maybe you made a nice garden, or you assembled something. Can you remember doing it piece by piece and the time and effort you put into it? How do you feel when others enjoy your creation? All of those ideas are in today's poem. So, the poet tells us a story of a landlord who found a fully assembled Cadillac in the attic when he was checking the property after the tenant moved out. So, stanza 1, and the poet tells us this poem in a narrative style, as if we're having a chat with him and we're having a conversation, like a story. So, after the tenant moved out, died or disappeared, so when the tenant left that house, whether he moved out or died or disappeared, okay, so the stories vary. The poet has heard many versions of this strange story, and he is now passing on the story to us. The landlord walked downstairs, bemused, and told his wife. Bemused means puzzled or confused, as anyone would be if they looked into the attic and saw a fully assembled Cadillac. There's a Cadillac in the attic. Stanza 2. And there was an old one, sure. The Cadillac was not in very good condition. It was an old one, and one with sloppy paint, bald tyres. So the Cadillac was badly painted, the tyres were in bad condition, and orange rust chewing at the rocker panels. Here the poet uses personification. Rust is the orange substance which grows on metal when it's old. It is as if the rust is eating away at the rocker panels of the Cadillac. This part here are the rocker panels. But still in all, a Cadillac in the attic. Even though it was old and rusty, it is still a Cadillac in the attic. Stanza 3. He'd battled transmission, chassis, engine block. In this stanza, the poet imagines the huge effort it took to get all the parts into the attic through the trapdoor. The poet used the word battled, like we have in the picture here, meaning it was like a tough fight to get all the parts into the attic. He had battled transmission, which is this part of the car, chassis, which is this part of the car, and engine block, which is this part of the car. Here the poet mentions some of the car parts the tenant had to bring up into the attic, and it was a real struggle or a real battle. Even the huge bench seats, the tenant even managed to get the huge car seats up into the attic to assemble the Cadillac. up the folding stairs, heaved them through the trapdoor. The tenant managed to lift all these car parts up the attic stairs. Heaved meant he lifted something with great difficulty. So as we said at the start of the poem, remember something you created. Maybe you put a lot of physical effort into it. Well, the tenant did the same thing, trying to bring all those parts one by one up and down the attic stairs. And rebuilt a Cadillac in the attic. With all these parts, the tenant, piece by piece, rebuilt a Cadillac in the attic. Stanza 4. Why'd he do it, we asked. But we know why. There is a change of tone or mood in this stanza. The poet starts to reflect or to think deeply on why the tenant built a Cadillac in the attic. We imagine all the people asking, why did he do it? But we know why. Even the reasons we would do it. He did it for the same reasons anyone would do it. He did it for the looks of astonishment he would never see but could imagine. Even though the tenant will never see the astonished looks, the surprised looks on the faces of those who discover his trick, he will always be happy knowing that his actions or his creation or his surprise had a strong effect on people. For the joke, a Cadillac in the attic. So literally he did it for the crack. The tenant did it just for fun to make people surprised and happy. And that gave him happiness even though he would never see their reaction. Stanza 5. And he did it for the meaning, though we aren't sure what it means. We aren't sure what is the meaning of putting a Cadillac in the attic. And of course, he did it for pleasure. The tenant did it for pleasure. But of course, it was an unusual, strange pleasure. The pleasure on his lips of all those short vowels. He did it for the pleasure of hearing people constantly say, Cadillac in the attic, Cadillac in the attic, Cadillac in the attic. He liked the sound of the phrase, the same way a poet might like the sound of a certain phrase in a poem, because poets love sounds. In the phrase, Cadillac in the attic, we have the short vowels a and I repeated. This is assonance, a technique used in poetry where there are repeated vowel sounds to create a musical quality. And he also did it for the sound of 3 hard clicks. K, k, k. The Cadillac in the attic. Cadillac in the attic. He loved the sound. The tenant would also get pleasure from hearing people use the repeated C sounds in the phrase, which is alliteration in poetry. This poem is a celebration of sound, as is many poems. The tenant was like a poet. Poetry might not have any practical use in our lives, but it brings joy and fun into people's lives. The tenant who built the Cadillac was like a poet writing a poem, or anybody creating. He was like a poet working hard on a poem for the pleasure of knowing that it will bring pleasure to the people who read it, but he will never see their faces. A poet never sees the faces of the readers, just like the Cadillac builder, the tenant, will never see the shock, surprise of the people who find the car. So, now that we have finished the poem, let's have a look at the technical side, or language of the poem. Sometimes the exam asks a question about the language or the imagery of the poem, and these are the kind of things you need to talk about. So first of all, the poet uses a metaphor. A metaphor is when you compare one thing to another thing. Building the Cadillac in the attic is a metaphor, or is similar to the creation of art or poetry. The tenant hopes that finding a car will bring pleasure to the finder, just as a poet or artist hopes that the readers will get pleasure from their creation. Theme, the main message of the poem. The theme of this poem is love of language and creativity. The pleasure for the poet is in the creating of the poem, as he will never see the joy on people's faces when they read it. The tone, or the mood of the poem. The tone is humorous, funny, and also conversational. It's as if the poet is telling us a story in a real chatty kind of style. In the last two stanzas, it is a reflective tone, when the poet asks, why did he do it? Repetition. The repetition of the phrase Cadillac in the attic shows the level of astonishment on the face of the person who discovered it. Also, the repetition of this phrase shows us that the poet enjoys hearing the assonance and alliteration in the phrase, as poets love sounds. As we said earlier, the assonance is the repeated vowel sounds, such as the A and I, and the alliteration is the repeated C sounds. Alliteration, repeated consonants, died and disappeared, d, d, d. These are heavy sounds, these repeated D sounds, reminding us of the heavy car in the attic, and possibly also the heaviness of dragging all those car parts up and down the attic stairs into the attic. Assonance, repeated vowel sounds, Cadillac in the attic, repeated A sounds and the repeated vowel I sounds. These create musical sounds in the poem. Personification, giving human qualities to non-human things. In stanza 2, the poet says, the orange rust chewing at the rocker panels. It's as if the rust has got large teeth and is chewing in to the side metal parts of the car. Okay, so hope you enjoyed that presentation. If you would like more, please go to Michelle Benson English Teacher and subscribe.